So welcome everybody to the Climate Adaptation Working Group of the 2021 YK-CEDS. And we have a great group together today. Just before we begin, a few housekeeping items. I'd like to thank everyone in advance for being respectful of the group, giving each other opportunity to say what you need to say and keep ourselves on mute when we're not speaking, so that we don't create any distracting background noises. The chat is open for those who are joining electronically. Feel free to put things in the chat, especially if there are things like websites or phone numbers or things that I'm not able to type quickly enough. I will go back and forth and copy and paste. I'm sharing my screen right now with our agenda, and it also has the previous year action items and implementation information that we'll want to focus today's discussion around updating, whether we've made any progress on these things, whether they're still relevant, whether they need to be amended in some way. So that's our target. I'll be taking notes as we do that. And as much as possible, I'll share my screen so that it happens while we're doing it. And I will be jumping around a little bit as I'm taking notes because some of the people are going to be coming and dropping off and coming in. So I'll want to keep a record of who's with us today. In just a moment, we'll go through and welcome everybody by name. And before we do that, I just would like to acknowledge and ask that we all, while we're introducing ourselves, take a moment to think about and acknowledge the generations of people who have been stewards on the land of the wherever we happen to be. I am in Anchorage, which is the traditional lands of the Dena'ina people. And I know we have a number of people calling in from the YK traditional lands of Yupik, Chupik, and Athabascan people. And we may have some folks calling in from other parts of the state as well. And so with that, I am going to go through the list that I have here, and hopefully it's not going to jump around too much while I'm doing this. So I'll call on you, and if you could just say hello and who you are very briefly, and then we'll move on to the next person. So we have Bessie Lee Weston.
Hi, this is Bessie Weston. I'm in from Macoriac. Thank you.
We have Bill Stam.
Good afternoon, Bill Stam with Alaska Village Electric. Hello.
Great. We have Clarence Daniel.
Clarence Daniel with AVCP.
Corbin John.
Corbin John with ANTHC.
Great. Deanna Latham.
Good afternoon, Deanna Latham with YKHC.
Great. Erin Leaders.
Hi, Erin Leaders with the State of Alaska Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management.
Florence Cargy.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Florence Cargy. I'm with Coastal Villages Region Fund.
Great. Then we have Jackie Overbeck.
Hi, Jackie Overbeck with the State of Alaska and our Division of Geological and Geophysical Surveys on our Coastal Hazards Program.
Great. Jennifer Schmetzer.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Schmetzer with Dow Engineering.
And then we have Joel.
Yeah, Joel Niemeyer here, and I'm going to be facilitating today's conversation.
Great. Jocelyn.
Sorry, that was taking me a minute to pull up the unmute button. Jocelyn Fenton with Denali Commission. And I have to jump between this and the Statewide Transportation Advisory Committee. So if I'm not here, I will jump back on in a little bit if there's any questions. Thanks.
Great. Krista.
Yeah, hi, this is Krista Herringa, and I am stepping in for Linda Chase, and we are both with the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center.
Great. Max.
Good afternoon, everyone. Max Neal with the Center for Environmentally Threatened Communities at ANTHC.
And we've got Mike Williams.
Yeah, I'm with the Akak Native community.
Okay, thank you very much. Mike Brubaker.
Hi, I'm with the Department of Community, Environment, and Health at the Alaska Native Tribal Health Consortium.
And then we have Miranda.
Hi everyone, my name is Miranda Strong and I'm the Director of Government Relations over at Celestia Corporation. Nice to see you all and talk to you all today.
Okay, thank you, Miranda. Your sound was not coming through there. There was some kind of strange feedback, but Miranda is coming to us from Celestia Corporation, and hopefully we'll have better luck with the sound quality going forward. Samantha?
Oh, hello. Sorry, I was on mute. I am with Donlin Gold.
Great. And then Terry Murphy.
Hi, Terry Murphy with the State of Alaska Department of Homeland Security and Emergency Management. I'm the State Hazard Mitigation Officer.
Great. And Vernon?
Yes, this is Vernon Chimelka. I'm also with Donlin Gold.
Great. And then we have a 545-0361. Somebody calling in from 545-0361. Okay, well, we have somebody calling in. And then we have Mark Springer.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. Mark Springer in Bethel.
Great. Oops, I'm sorry, Vernon, I'm spelling your name wrong. Okay. Thank you very much. I think that's everyone. Is there anyone whose name I did not call?
Yes, Heather, this is Sally.
Oh, Sally, I'm sorry.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sally Russell Cox, and I'm with the State of Alaska Department of Commerce, Community and Economic Development, Division of Community and Regional Affairs, and I manage the division's community resilience programs. Nice to be here.
Great. And with that, I am going to hand over facilitation to Joel, and I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that Joel can share his screen and introduce a few ideas for us before we get into the action planning.
So Heather, I just hit share screen and everyone will see what I want to share.
If you hit share screen, it will give you the option to share either a screen or a application, and you just choose what you want to share.
Very good. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today. I was asked last week to facilitate this, and I immediately said yes. This is my mom's region. I've been lately working in the village of Akiak on a manage retreat project. Some of you may know me formally at the Denali Commission, where we worked on the Village Infrastructure Protection Program. So right now I have former experience as a Fed and current experience assisting a tribe as they try to develop a managed retreat solution. I will share with you a couple of things. One is it says Jill Niemeyer. This is my mom, my wife's computer and not mine. So you're seeing her name. I'm Joel, I'm not Jill. The other is that yesterday all the facilitators got together and we talked, and I asked if we could deviate from script somewhat, and I was given permission to do so. And so what I want to do is I want to have about a 5-7 minute conversation about where I think this could go to be applicable to the region, and then ask folks if that's where you'd like to go. And so I'm going to try sharing the screen. Let's see. Is it? Not sure. Am I sharing it? Can folks see this?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So this one pager outlines what I'd like to talk about today, and bear with me as we go through this. So today is about mitigation preparedness, and although it's called climate adaptation, what I've shared with others is I think this should be about disaster resilience. That is project or infrastructure that is directly impacted by climate change, that which is exacerbated by climate change, and then disaster resilience unrelated to climate change. I don't think it's important to really spend too much time on climate change. I think the focus should be on disaster resilience, and then how does climate change impact that? I want to talk about the word mitigation. I'm a civil engineer by training, so mitigation to me is mitigating the risk to the built environment. With others, the media and policymakers, they think of mitigation as greenhouse gas, addressing that. We're not talking about greenhouse gas today. So when I use the word mitigation, I'm talking about disaster resilience to the built environment. The next two items are basically how I want to approach today's conversation. There are two types of federal funds for mitigation. One is the conventional funders, water, sewer, roads, airports, clinics, that sort of thing. And then the disaster funders, typically FEMA, although Congress gives money to other federal agencies as well. Now, the conventional funders may or may not include disasters in their scoring rubrics. And then the disaster funders may or may not consider community development growth. Now, what does that mean? It means that you may have a disaster in a community, piece of infrastructure gets wiped out, and the disaster funders will only replace it as it was. Whereas it'd be so much better for the community if just there were some modest improvements to improve it to today's level of need. And they can't do that. And so you have these disconnects between the federal funders. And quite frankly, over the years, I've learned that they speak different languages. Even though, they're feds, they have different approaches. Now, this is where the big part of today rests. I think it should be focused on federal funding through the Disaster Relief Fund, which is the central, one of the central portions of funding for disasters. And then there's one-off congressional appropriations. Very few tribes get one-off congressional appropriations. But what's important is in order to go in that swim lane to get disaster funding, you've got to play the game that meets those agencies' needs. When I reviewed the SEDS document, by the way, the SEDS document is a federal document. Is a federal document funded by a federal agency to be able to determine whether future federal actions should be funded. And so we are already in a federal world right now. This discussion is federal. And the largest funder is of disasters, it's federal. Now the state has a role, but they're providing a cost share match. Philanthropy, they give a little bit of money here and there. Local communities have some funds. But here in rural Alaska, the issue we have compared to other communities, we don't have a tax base. Other communities do. So fundamentally, our discussion, in my mind, should be, how do we get the federal funds? What do we do to get the federal funds? And that's where I think, that's what I'd like to have a conversation about. The next two things are pretty self-evident. There's a disaster cycle. Many of you know about it. Our focus are on the first two items, mitigation, preparedness. When you're in response and recovery, let's let the fine folks at FEMA and Alaska Homeland Security manage that and let them do their good work. The other part is that, and I'm dealing with this now in Akiak, you have mixed emergency events. And so although the disaster cycle and the disaster mitigation is relatively straightforward, it can fairly quickly get complicated when you have disasters rolling on top of it. So with that, Heather, I don't know how you want to poll folks on whether they want to make a sharp right turn and say an actionable annual update has to focus on federal funding. How would you like to proceed with that, Heather? You're on mute.
Thank you. I would say we can open it up for any thoughts. I can create a poll if that would be helpful, but that people might have some thoughts around this or some questions, and I would suggest opening to that.
Sure.
Bill, this is Max. Love where you're headed. I'm curious. I saw a glimpse of Heather's screen before, which had maybe some alternative agenda. I'm just wondering if we could take a quick glance at this so we can compare all our alternatives. Like, do you want to do a hybrid, like run through some of that and then focus on this, or just focus on this?
No, what I was going to do is we have an agenda, and what I would do is go down that agenda, but we would go through it with this mindset. The biggest funder is federal, so we should be including that. That should be part of our thinking as we move forward.
So the question then is, do we want to go through the action plan that we have with a federal focus, a federal emphasis, which would mean we would probably make some adjustments to some of the existing action items to build in more.
I think that works for me, but I want to put it to everyone else because this is the
Well,
first
I just
time
want to clarify that that's what we're asking. That's all. Okay, I can create a quick poll for that. If anybody else has any other comments or questions, feel free to chime in.
Well, hearing none, Heather, why don't we go ahead and proceed with the 2020 work product, their action plan, and we can just go down the list and we can talk about each one of those items to bring us all up to speed so we can then create a 2021 list.
This is Sally. My recollection is that the actions that got integrated into the SEDS plan were from the YK, the Adapt YK Delta effort. Is that correct? for this part of it. It looks like a lot of them are very similar in that the document that you had shared before.
I don't know.
Okay, and while we do that, I might reshare my screen so that people can look at the some of the action plans that we have, and I'll just run through those at a very high level. So the action plan tasks, we have a complete risk assessments for high-risk communities that lack an assessment. B, provide technical assistance and training to high-risk communities to conduct assessments and manage ongoing communications around climate change response. C, strengthen linkages between traditional knowledge, technical models, and data collected throughout the region, and better tie this to state and global bodies of knowledge. D, advocate for more flexible FEMA regulations to meet the immediate needs of communities and make programs more accessible. And E, develop map-based climate adaptation community profiles that describe threat assessment status, relevant plans, and linkages to other agency or organizational data.
Yeah, so that looks a lot like the actions that came out of the YK, the Adapt YK plan. These got integrated into this plan.
Well, Heather, let me go ahead and start with the complete risk assessments, and then we'll keep going, okay?
Okay.
So under complete risk assessments, estimated costs of $450,000 from community. Let me give you 3 examples, which makes me question this. In Akiak, which I spoke of earlier, 2019, we had a major riverine erosion event in the springtime that had never happened before. And fortunately, in 2013, NRCS had completed a bathymetric survey of the river. And so we knew the river depth and basically the contours of the river. Then they came up in 2019 and did another bathymetric survey. And what we found is pretty shocking is the river, the main river channel is just moving west right into the village. What we don't know is the pace at which it's moving into the village. So we didn't need a $450,000 study. We just needed to call NRCS, and they gave us the information that we needed to make immediate action. What we don't know is where it's going to end up. And right now that just means that we just have to be doing additional bathymetric surveys over time to see where we go. There's a community up in the interior I've been helping with, and they wanted to do a wildfire plan and incorporate it in their hazard mitigation plan. And they worked with BLM, BLM mobilized, they did air flights there, and there was no cost to the village. And they now working through BLM know where they should put, not burn lines, but fire break lines. And they didn't know that, but the feds helped them with that. And then the third one would be the case in Newtok, where the community just measured it, and they knew over time that erosion was 70 feet a year. So I question this cost of $450,000, but what I don't question is trying to get to understanding the risk to the built environment. And I think putting a cost figure has a way of sticker shock, shall we say, to others. I think this would be better to something risk assessment and other examples or other ways of understanding science to the built environment. And not necessarily go with a solution. We have a number of solutions here. I think it's much simpler to be able to say the solutions are to that particular risk.
Joel, totally agree with you. Let's pull the cost out of here. And you make an important point about the difference between near-term threats, immediate threats, and long-term threats, where the need for more robust analysis is beneficial. So yeah, I think this whole thing can be revised and simplified, you know, to address near-term threats and long-term threats, if you want to do that. And then there's a note in here about a tracking website and sheet. So Jackie Overbeck and ANTHC and DCRA work together to pull together a little website that tracks the status of risk assessments. So I'm just going to paste those links into the chat for anyone who's not familiar with those.
Heather, is that item E that Max is referring to?
I mean, it sounds like it has to do with this one as well, but.
It's the
not
second
big.
bullet under A, Joel.
Oh, is it? Okay, I didn't know if it was E. So the second bullet.
Create tool to map the status assessment of current risk assessments.
Okay, and I'm sorry, Max, who was that again that has been working on this?
You could just say state DGGS. It's they're the ones who published it. And so there's two links there. The second one is a community-specific tracking sheet that shows the status of different data collection and risk assessment components. That's obviously not perfect, but it's up to date based on the information that we know. And it's accurate for YK communities largely.
Yes, thanks for introducing that, Max. And that has been an effort that we've been working on collaboratively with the CETC program. So trying to stay up to date on what is available for all communities obviously is a challenge, but since their program is working with a lot of communities and our DGGS Coastal Hazards program has major efforts to develop assessments for communities at least in the coastal zone. There is a lot of valuable information in that database.
Okay, I am gonna make these super small so that it doesn't throw off the formatting too much. But we will be sending out copies of these that are a little bit cleaned up after the meeting so that we can share those with you all. And for those that are joining us online, you have those links in the chat. So you can certainly copy and paste them into your browser or onto your computer to look at when you like to.
So Jackie and Max, this is Sally. Is the tracking sheet also funded through the NCRS project? Because if it is, I think that would be a valuable additional funding source to put down here. And that's a federal funding source too. It's a combination of, it's actually NOAA funding that's administered by the National Fish and Wildlife Fund. It's the NCRF, National Coastal Resilience Fund, or NCRF.
F.
Yeah, and it's NOAA funded, but it's administered by what we call NIFWF, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation.
So this tool was originally funded by the Denali Commission for DGGS's work in developing it. But moving forward, management of the tool will be beneficial both for that NCRF project and then, I mean, through state funds as well from our program.
This is Mark Springer. I've got a question and comment.
Yes.
Thanks. First of all, you know, $450,000 per village, just for the YK Delta, that tots up to about 25 million. Just for studying hazards and presumably with some mitigation proposals in there. I think it's important for everybody to realize that the villages, the communities know what the hazards are that they face.
Yep.
And it you know, it doesn't cost almost $500,000 to figure out that, for example, Hooper Bay has ongoing coastal erosion problems. They've lost a huge amount of their beach protection. Section of their river there is just waiting to blow out between the bay and the slough there. You know, the communities know what the hazards are, the immediate hazards. The communities have been observing for many, many years the impacts climate change has had, whether it is changes in vegetation or a longer, drier summer that creates fire hazards like Joel was talking about, whether it is, significant constant change in the direction of the Kuskokwim River, eating up bank in front of the village. And what kind of bugs me is there doesn't seem, and I know that the SEDS description is just an outline, but where's the mechanism in there for really involving the community in that process? And since we're talking about substantial amounts of money, trying to leave some of that money there. I mean, the fact is $450,000 will build a lot of fire break in a wildfire threatened community. $450,000 will move homes away from a riverbank, and allow for other mitigation measures to take place. And mitigation is really the key. You know what the problems are going to be. Nobody is going to be, hopefully, not particularly surprised at climate change impacts. They're pretty predictable. They're already happening. So we really need to start mitigating, which is, kind of responding to, but at the same time preventing the impacts from climate change. So I'm just speaking up for trying to support the communities in their own efforts of design and planning, and try to put those resources in the communities with the technical assistance that they require. And every community is different. Everybody has, here on the Kuskokwim, up on the Yukon, climate impact is conceivably our poor salmon returns, and you can study that in depth or figure out how to mitigate it. So, but Joel, I really like that one-page outline you had there. I think that's real strong work, and kind of puts it all in a nutshell and really does lay out a good path forward, an understandable path forward for anybody that looks at it. Thanks.
Well, Mark, thank you for those comments. And this is where I'm going to introduce the federalism component to this action item. So you complete a risk assessment. What do you do with it? How does it help you get federal funds? How did you actually fund it? So the driver in my experience has been the hazard mitigation plan as managed by FEMA and carried out by either tribes or the state of Alaska. And about a year ago, I got an update report from Homeland Security about the status of hazard mitigation plans in rural Alaska. And the vast majority of the plans are either expired or going to expire within a year. And so you have many communities that just can't compete for federal funds or through FEMA because they don't have an updated hazard mitigation plan. So in my mind, what I see is a combined merging of documents. So it's risk assessments, it's hazard mitigation plans, and it's corresponding associated reports. So for example, our friends from ANTHC and Village Safe Water, they're used to what's called a sanitation preliminary engineering report, a PER. Does the PER, sanitation PERs, reflect the pending disaster, and does it connect to the hazard mitigation plan? Likewise, BIA has a process for tribal transportation called a long-range transportation plan. Do the long-range transportation plans tie into the hazard mitigation plan? The reason why I raise this is that FEMA does something that's absolutely fascinating to me. They're very flexible when it comes to hazard mitigation plans. Once it's approved, it's got 5 years in which you can use it. But they allow you to do annual updates. So if you, let's say, for example, you don't have the transportation concerns in your hazard mitigation plan, that's okay. The next year, when you're due to do the BIA long-range transportation plan, you incorporate the disaster components, the language in your plan. And then when you do a annual hazard mitigation plan update, it's a one-pager. You say, we adopt the long-range transportation plan. Next thing you know, it is part of the hazard mitigation plan, and those transportation needs will be eligible for FEMA funds. So for me, it's a much broader question. How do we play with all these existing systems, all these federal systems which have all these plans on infrastructure? How do we link them together so that they communicate to the conventional funders and the disaster funders what's going on in the village? And as you said, Mark, what the village sees as their threats. The other part of this component, which I would love to see, but I haven't seen yet, is where in this process of putting together this suite of documents, where does the community prioritize what's important or not based upon their knowledge? And that, let me turn that back to you, Mark. Is that something you think would be very important as we move forward in working and through all these different documents, having them linked together, having them talk together, that the community is there prioritizing which projects are more important over others? So to you, Mark.
No, I would agree with that, Joel. I mean, obviously, if you're dealing with multiple funding sources, you need to have multiple plans in place, because what one agency might want to pick up, another one might not want to, and you need both of those. So yeah, absolutely, there has to be technical coordination within a community plan, and within plans in regions and subregions. There's no question about that, and that's that's certainly a technical, not quite a hurdle that can be overcome. And there should be, I think, as is kind of suggested there, a repository of the plans. But I just think that the plans need to come up from the community. There have to be people asking what they need help with, and NHC with their Center for Environmentally Friendly Communities has that going on. So no, I agree with everything you said there, Joel.
Well, then with that, Mark, you would accept my recommendation. We put a fourth bullet point under this, and that would be incorporate local knowledge about the environmental threats, and then their prioritization of alternative solutions to address those threats.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, I've been long-winded and I put Mark on the spot, so I'd ask others, what are your thoughts about Action Plan Task A?
Well, I was raising my hand, but I'm going to speak out. This is Sally. I just wanted to point out that the American Planning Association and FEMA have worked together for some time and put together a really great document on integrating local hazard mitigation plans into comprehensive planning. And so, of course, the comprehensive plan is kind of the umbrella plan that a community has, from which all other plans are supposed to flow and be consistent with. So there's a really good document out there that gives great ways that you can make sure that your hazard mitigation plan is integrated into all of those other plans. Just want to make sure that everybody knows that there is assistance out there for
that. Sally, is there a link to that?
I can, it's been a while since I've looked at it, but I can get it for you. It's through the PAS, the planning, I forget what that stands for.
Okay, right, yeah. Okay.
Heather, this might suggest that the lead, I don't know who the lead is under this category, but certainly the community isn't listed there. And we need to include them as a partner or as the lead in this process. And presumably, in my mind, it would be the community, and ANTHC would be a partner as long as well as the state of Alaska and so on and so forth. I put that back to folks for their thoughts.
The other thing that I wanted to mention in terms of risk assessments is that FEMA, especially now with the priorities of the Biden administration, is definitely looking at doing risk assessments in communities that don't participate in the National Flood Insurance Program. And that would include a lot of our communities up here in Alaska. So that's another resource, potentially.
So I think part of this is just how this was written before. So if we move the individual communities as the lead on doing, ensuring that the risk assessments are completed if they need one. I am wondering about, okay, some of the subtasks underneath this, there would be a lead on those particular ones, and those are now partners. I do wonder with this in terms of this being an item in an ongoing federal plan, and we want to be able to track progress when we get to talking about the indicators. Is ANTHC, or is there another group that would maybe play a role in helping to track who has these, who doesn't have these?
Well, Alaska Homeland Security is the one who's tracking it. And that's the one who gave me the list last year of the status of the plans. And so we'd have to ask our friends from Homeland Security who are online if that's something you guys can provide periodically to stakeholders in the YK Delta.
Yeah, the information like that can be provided with no problem. It's, public knowledge. It's just a mechanism to get it out there.
Okay.
FEMA sends spreadsheets of the plans out to a number of people. I get it weekly from them on the status of the different hazard mitigation plans in the state.
Well, is there a way which it's posted, or do you have to be on a listserv?
I'm not sure who actually gets access to the weekly update, because it comes from a program that you have to have specific access to. But I mean, there's a way to get the information out there.
Well, we'll work on that later.
The thing to look at, the information about plans expiring, and that doesn't change that much week to week. I mean, we can look ahead and tell which plans are going to expire and when. The other problem we have is looking at communities who have never had a plan. And sometimes that's our inability with resources and funding. And sometimes it's because the communities don't want one. That does occur.
So right now, the communities are responsible for HMPs, and there's no real lead in supporting this besides the community. It would be wonderful if FEMA could take the lead in ensuring that communities have the resources they need to meet FEMA requirements. So that's not something we can really tag FEMA on here as go do this, FEMA. But just wanted to know.
It's not really FEMA's responsibility. It falls, I think, within the state of Alaska, and we within the Department of Homeland Security and the mitigation team are trying to come up with ways to include all the communities. But in some degrees, it's sometimes a losing proposition, because the 5-year expiration is a problem. There is something coming down the pike. I don't have a lot of information, and I just learned about it this week, that if you have a hazard mitigation plan that has not changed significantly, and we do have a lot, the hazards that are presented to communities, especially in rural Alaska, don't change all that much. The infrastructure does not change all that much, as long as the plan included everything to begin with. If that is the case, we don't have the final outcome. It's a policy change that you don't have to go through a full-blown update. And I'm not sure exactly what they're going to call it or what we have to do, but that may be something down the road.
Thank you, Terry, for giving us that input. I also suggest, Heather, here, we have a question. The second bullet, I think, is unnecessary. We talk about, is there a role? And then we say encourage. Seems to me that we just get rid of that question and just say encourage UA and the other institutions. And then, you know, we've got that issue covered about academic engagement with the community and regional partners.
Okay, delete it.
Can I toss something in on that?
Fire away, Mark.
Yeah, thanks. So one of the things that I heard in the last little bit of discussion was community engagement. And that is, you know, the state does have the opportunity to develop community engagement on hazard mitigation, hazard planning, and situation response. What we don't have, the VPSO program and our health aides notwithstanding, what we don't have out here is an indigenous, using that as a technical word, an indigenous capacity in our communities to do planning and to do response. Now, when the Adjutant General was out here and some folks from DES last summer, I guess, it was suggested, why isn't there a Division of Emergency Services emergency response specialist stationed in Bethel? And it was like, oh yeah, that's a good idea. You know, it hasn't happened. I don't know if it ever will. But we need to engage communities by training people, whether it is a breakout session during the BIA Providers Conference, or during AFN, or something on the side, to teach people the fundamentals of emergency management, which includes planning and response. The University of Alaska, up at UAF, up at TVCC, you know, they have a police academy. I think they still do, and they've got a fire academy. So they have the capacity in there, the academic capacity, to teach emergency management by teleconference, by distance delivery. It can be taught here at KUC. So we really need to work towards, we need to arc towards, and the agencies need to arc towards getting people in the communities, community leaders or standalone individuals who are trained as competent, planners, paraprofessional planners, and emergency management people, because there's a common language, right? You've got the incident command system. There's a common language in emergency management. There's a common language in planning. We need to make sure that people in the communities know that. Now, I should talk. It's taking the city of Bethel a really long time just to update our, emergency management plan. I do want to give some kudos to ANTHC for those red books that they sent out a long time ago to the communities that are kind of pre-drafted emergency response plans. But I think that when we talk about engagement and we talk about, developing capacity, goes right along with that. When I hear engagement, it's like somebody's going to come out and have a meeting and hear what people think, and then they're going to go back to their office in Anchorage or wherever. engagement means developing local capacity. And I think that that needs to be a bullet point somewhere in there, Joel. Thanks.
Thank you, Mark. I think, Heather, we've pretty much beaten up item A. Should we just call for any final comments on item A?
Yeah, I would just ask if we have any clear next steps for item A.
Well, I will suggest this. I've worked on FEMA grant applications, and our friends at FEMA and Homeland Security, they'll tell you it can be difficult. The electronic platform. I've worked on BI travel resilience grants, and those are much simpler. And what I think should be a consideration is that a lot of our communities would be eligible for a modest $60,000 grant, capacity building grant from BI Travel Resilience. And they can use that to do their updates of all of the hazard mitigation plan or draft a new one. So there's a lot of opportunity through the BI Travel Resilience. I see that as a very excellent tool. It's sort of the entry of the federal process. Then once you go through that process and you get your documents in order that are necessary to be able to compete with FEMA, then you go into the FEMA platform, and it is much more difficult, but you have everything ready so that you can compete for the FEMA funds. Now, here's a piece of information that many of you may not know. The FEMA BRIC program this past year, $500 million nationwide, 20 million set aside for Indian country. It was subscribed less than $21 million. So, and there's only like 50 tribes that applied nationwide. So, about 10% of all tribes nationwide applied for the open portal for 20 million. But in order to compete, you've got to have that HMP. And so to me, there's a very simple solution. Tribes go get the $60,000 BI Travel Resilience Grant. They update their documents, then they can compete. And right now, it looks wide open for tribes to be able to get FEMA Travel Resilience money. And I think it's a great opportunity. It's just waiting for communities to do this.
Hey, I'd like to add something to the first task item. So sorry to keep on this subject, but there's a lot of focus on FEMA, and that's obviously critical for communities in working through this process. But I want folks to understand too that risk assessment, I mean, first off, it is very important. So, I know, Mark, you brought up some questions about why they even need to be completed if communities know what the issues are in their particular space. And I totally get that, but taking it back to something Joel even said, having a document that can go across boundaries and that the federal agencies can understand almost as a different language. And so it is really critical that there be data associated with the hazards that's occurring in the communities, especially if federal funding is going to be applied for to mitigate them. But the response and the amount of work that needs to be done in every community is going to be very different. I think that's the utility of trying to track data and types of reporting for communities in a kind of a standardized way, and say, okay, well, this community needs this, but this community might not. They may only have a few buildings that are at risk to erosion or permafrost degradation or whatever it may be. And so, we start off with that $450,000 price tag. It's obviously going to be really different for every community. And there probably needs to be some sort of technical guidance given to communities so they know what exactly they do need to go through to identify their risk, and whether or not they need to have a $100,000 morphodynamic model done of their community, or whether that's too much. So yeah, I would just say adding in that technical assistance for communities to identify what risk assessments might be most beneficial for their decision-making process. And then also note that, obviously UAA is called out, but and other institutions, but the academic institutions across Alaska and even in the lower 48 could be very beneficial for completing some of these assessments. And I think there are some ongoing state efforts to try and incorporate that group of knowledge and having some more people working on these issues to develop risk assessments that take, really technical modeling type skills. But that's all I'll add in there. Thanks.
Anyone else on item A? Thank you, Jackie.
This is Bessie out in Koyak.
Please.
I just wanted to point out that there are plans for many communities. I'm not sure exactly of the number within the YK Delta, but the DC, State of Alaska DCCED or DCRA, they have communities many communities have plans that are even uploaded on their website that covers a lot of these things, of emergency response, and pretty analogous to the whole SEDS idea by section. So that it may be that communities are not aware that they already have these plans. That I know this because that's the case for Mikoyak. We had a plan for years and nobody knew about it. So that's it. Thanks.
Thanks, thanks, Bessie. This is Sally, and that's my agency, and I actually am the one that uploads those plans, including all the hazard mitigation plans. And if you want to go in and do a query, you can just look up hazard mitigation plans, and it will bring up every single mitigation plan for every community that's available right now that we have uploaded, including the state hazard mitigation plan.
Heather, should we move on to task B?
You should. There's some overlap with what we've already been discussing.
Quite a bit, yes. Let me offer this. Is there any way you can show the document I sent earlier? The very last page, page 4 of the document I sent you.
While she's doing that, Joel, on there for B, it says lead ABCP Community Development Division. And one of the leads, and our division still hasn't been fully developed.
Okay.
And we are not fully staffed. So that's one, some of the things here that are things that we want to start doing, but we don't have the human capacity and the positions staffed yet, so we haven't gotten into performing some of these things in B.
I see.
So it's
important. We'll come back to that, but if you could go to the last page here, Heather. Yes, item 11. So these last 2 pages, and these will be, I understand Agnew Beck will make this available to folks if they want to, but this item 11 is a new principle that National Congress American Indian has adopted. And it's about tribal organizations. And I raise this because presently the FEMA process, tribes can apply, and in the BIA process, tribes can apply, and it's a very clunky. They have a very clunky mechanism by which the tribes apply, and they can have a subgrantee who's a tribal organization. Whereas in general, what we're used to is that tribal organizations get a resolution from the tribes and they act on their behalf, whether it's the Housing Authority or YKHC or ABCP. I'm just pointing this out is that as we go through this item B and we talk about encouraging communities to work together, the current federal funders, it's kind of an awkward mechanism to gain their funding support for these sort of relationships. I don't mean it to criticize the way it's set up. It's just, it is what it is, and we just need to be aware of it moving forward. So thank you, Heather. You can pull that down and we can start discussion on item B. And again, coming from a federal standpoint, you know, because they're the big dog providing all the funding. In my mind, the sentence says to provide technical assistance training to conduct assessments and managing ongoing communications. What's missing there is how do the communities get federal funds? How do they get the funding? There needs to be, in my mind, that is a missing component here, is how do they seek and obtain the funding? And I'll put that out for everyone, for folks to comment on, because I think, again, that's a big point here about getting actionable items over the next couple of years. Well, hearing nothing, let's move forward then. I guess people are supportive of the idea to obtain federal funding, conduct assessments, managing ongoing communication. I would ask about those 4 bullets there. Do folks see those 4 bullets being consistent with that sentence, or is it, do we need to do some editing, or is there anything missing? Thoughts from anyone on the 4 bullets?
Joel, I'm wondering if this could be adapted a little bit to focus on securing funding to have multidisciplinary technical assistance teams and build the local capacity. I think largely it was focused on communications around climate change response. I see, like, yes, there's a need to have more communications on climate change response, but it seems like this is focused on how do we build the capacity both locally and external to actually do what is needed.
That's interesting. Thank you, Max. Anyone else? Well, so Max, I want to call on you on this, what you've raised. So can you tell me, can you describe more how you see the regional support or the external support, the capacity building on the effort in the YK area as opposed to just specifically to the individual communities? Do you see where I'm going with that, Max?
Yeah, I do. So right now, I guess the model is, where there is no cohesive process. It's a community can work with whomever they want for technical assistance. What could be better is I think we've discussed this, but there's so much local expertise in the region. So perhaps, Clarence, if AVCP wanted to establish a program or another organization in the YK, there could be a larger technical assistance team based in the YK that could support communities. And then could also be more support for local positions in the communities. And then there could be some extra support at a statewide level too. So that's one way that things could change in the future. Many different ways to do it.
So Max, thank you. I'm going to put Clarence on the spot. You started us off, Clarence, by saying this division isn't fully developed. Can you speak a little bit more to that, and whether you think that within the next year or two, it makes sense that this division would develop that capacity to be able to take lead on this item B?
At this point, I think we're looking at being fully developed by the end of 2022. And I think one thing that we would need help from, and it's in here, you know, CETC to help ID funding for the team. You know, we would need to do that. But one of the things with Community Development Division was trying, you know, providing the assistance, the technical assistance, TA and everything like that for doing the mitigation planning or the hazard planning. So it's something that I'm pretty sure we could do, but we would just need to ID that funding source.
And that's been a barrier. Is Joel mentioned there's 60K for communities to apply, but the amount of funding that's available for an entity to provide, basically have multiple staff is very limited right now. So the model that Joel suggested of each community apply, that's available now, but there's not a larger source for to establish a larger program.
Well, Max, thank you for that. Let me speak to that as well. I've tried to figure out how to do this at not a community level, but a regional level or a consortium level. And it's been a challenge to figure out how to do it the last couple of years. For example, HUD has a program in which they provide capacity and technical assistance training. But if you apply for it, you've got to be willing to provide the training across the nation. So if you're wanting to work in rural Alaska on this issue, if someone asks for your help from Arizona, you've got to go. So that's sort of a disincentive on the national program, using that program. It works probably for what HUD needs, but in this specific case, it's awkward. I can go through all the other agencies that I've tried to work with, but it just isn't easy to find one that can do this. Well, with that downer of a note, let's keep going. So
do we have any clear next steps for this one? If not, I will say we'll revisit it at the next meeting.
Well, I would turn to Clarence on that. Do you think that there are any next steps that are apparent, or?
I think IDing the fund, getting a good idea of the revenue source and having a stable and sustainable revenue source is really the next, because we can't really, you know, move forward with anything without having that in place.
Right. Okay. With that, I'll ask, are there any final comments on item B?
One thing now, you know, the administration seems friendly to climate change issues. You know, maybe advocating for some kind of you know, special funding for this, for doing this with tribes might be an idea.
Clarence.
Yes, I agree with you. I would say though, Clarence, from my experience back when I was federal co-chair working with a prior administration and seeing a number of the same players here, they really are focused on greenhouse gas mitigation. And in my conversations when I was DC, it was very difficult to get them to see otherwise, to see that it's disaster resilience. And that's why I started the conversation today, that I think this conversation should be about disasters that are impacted by climate change or not, but it's about disasters. And I was unsuccessful when I was at Denali Commission trying to convince my associates on the East Coast that they're missing the boat by just focusing only on greenhouse gases. So someone already acknowledged that Mike Williams, the tribal chief from Akiak, is online, and he is he's in the leadership with NCAI, and hopefully NCAI will be able to take that message back to this administration.
Okay.
Heather,
And Chief Williams did respond to that.
Yeah, I think, with our projects here in Akiak, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. We've been having connection problems and I've been off and on all day. Yeah, I think with what's happening in the Northwest and also in Alaska, yeah, we have to all work together to work collaboratively, HUD, BIA, IHS, FEMA, and other agencies. We need to work together to work on these impacts that we are dealing with, for example, in Akiak. And we know well that when we have these community meetings and planning, and we come short all the time with several agencies not working together. And I think it slows down the process when we're not working together. So NCI just passed a resolution on the principles that need to be followed to make sure that each community, each tribe is being supported, and those mitigation and adaptation plans are in place. And so it's I think we need to definitely work together to really come out for each community to do their assessments and to take the action plan. And with the infrastructure and housing and water sanitation and other managed retreat projects that are coming up to address the erosion and other plans. I think each community needs to develop a plan following those principles that we just passed at NCAI. And I know that Quinault and Northwest tribes have been having these climate change impact work meetings on ongoing basis, on regular basis. And I attended some of the ANTHC adaptation and mitigation work sessions, and those were very helpful to us. And but they need to be ongoing. And I think for instance, I think AVCP can have those meetings together with the 56 tribes in the region here, 58. I don't know, it fluctuates with our tribes, but yeah, I think you have the copy of that resolution that was passed in. You went through it just briefly earlier, Joel, and thank you for bringing that up, because right now I think we're working to save a lot of our the grief and loss in our community. So we have to work together with agencies and et cetera to make sure that everybody's working together. And thank you very much for the time.
Thank you, Mike. So Heather, I think we're ready to move on to item C. So this one gets to a conversation Mark was talking about gathering local input on both what are the threats and then prioritizing what are the solutions. And so when I read the sentence, I think it all reads well, except that what it's missing is how this information then links to risk assessments, hazard mitigation plans, and other infrastructure planning documents. And so I put that to folks. Would you agree that that is a necessary component of item C, that the knowledge is then transferred to those documents in question that we talk about in item A? So comments?
Hi, this is Jackie. And I would have to say in the assessments that we do of flooding and erosion, local knowledge is critical to those assessments and really cannot be completed without engagement with the community. And I'm betting Sally has some follow-up too on moving from the risk side to the planning side and how that's incorporated. So I would let her speak to that.
Thank you. Sally, you're on.
Okay, well, yeah, I mean, it's, in my mind, as a planner, it's a no-brainer that you collect information and that informs your decision-making process, which is part of that planning process to develop a strategy for achieving the solutions that you want to get to. So one of the things that we're doing in the project that I'm working on with Jackie and Max is developing a community survey that will be administered by somebody from within the community, and it will be a door-to-door survey, and that's going to precede our engagement with the community. So we have a really good idea about what is important to community members, what are the hazards that are affecting them the most. And before we even have any conversation with them about local hazards, we want to hear from them and start the conversation from then. And the other thing that we're doing is looking at their existing hazard mitigation plans, because every hazard mitigation plan has a mitigation strategy at the end of it, where you identify and the community prioritizes actions. And those are extremely helpful in engaging a community in any additional work that they might want to have done. I mean, the hazard mitigation plan is the community's adopted, it's their adopted plan, and they've accepted the information that's in that. And so we should always be looking at those first and then broaden that conversation. But and I would say, I fully agree with Jackie that, yes, local knowledge is so important, and almost every community that I've worked with is very familiar with the hazards that are impacting them. But what they don't have information on is what the longer term trends are going to be for the community. And that's where the risk assessments come in. That's where the science comes in. And so that really helps them with their planning and their decision making. And, do we stay here? Do we move things away from hazard prone areas? Or is this a more serious situation where we really need to consider relocation? Those types of solutions really are dependent upon a lot of the science. So.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, Jackie. So again, where I was coming at from Heather was, not only do we have these linkages and we use the data information, I think the way, in order to capture it back into the revised task A, is I think you would, on that second bullet there, and also use the hazard mitigation plan. I mean, specifically use that language.
So are we integrating this into the hazard mitigation plan specifically? You want?
No, not necessarily. I'm just saying that if we talk about it as part of A and we want this to link, I think I think there may be linkages on with other processes, but I think it's important to specifically talk about the HMP process.
Okay, so the second bullet would be done specifically through the HMP process?
No, it's one of many of these other planning efforts, but I think it's important enough that we specifically call it out.
Okay, that's what I was trying to clarify.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
Thank you so much. Okay, so community profiles, the hazard mitigation planning, threat assessments, other planning efforts, but we want to specifically call that out.
I do, and again, I come back to this, how flexible FEMA is, that they allow the plans to be updated annually. And I really haven't seen other agencies do that. I think it's a fantastic option that cities and tribes have. As for progress update, I don't know, folks who've worked on this the past year or two, couple of years, are we doing anything here, or this is just a watchword that this is how we want to conduct ourselves? Sounds to me like, Heather, we're moving on to item D.
Okay.
So this one's a hard one for me, and I'm going to call Max on the spot on this, because Max and I have talked about this at length, and Max has provided recommendations on how FEMA can make it, or how they can manage their grant system so it's easier or more accessible for rural Alaska. And what I've shared with him, my experience have being a Fed, is that previously, is that if FEMA lowers the requirements for tribal groups in rural Alaska, the next thing you know, rural communities in Iowa are going to say, well, what about us? And so it's just been my experience. You can go ahead and ask, but it will fall on deaf ears because they're fearful. The agencies are fearful that it will then be picked up by others. And they're saying, hey, we're no different. We're rural too. So.
Yeah, Joel, my recommendation, so AVCP worked on a resolution since this plan was developed. AVCP passed a resolution, and then AFN passed a resolution, it's number 2020, which has some language on this. And then since then, ANTHC is engaged directly with FEMA, hazard mitigation, program leadership and regional, and then submitted comments to FEMA on their climate and equity request for comments, 10 pages. But my recommendation, based on trying to be a champion for this over many years, is that our action plan task is build capacity to advocate. That I've seen, our program here, we can't do it all. ANTHC's intergovernmental affairs team is strapped, and AFN's climate change task force has yet to really determine what they're going to do. So I think that right now I see it as a capacity gap, that we need communities to speak up, and then it would be great if there was more capacity amongst Alaska Native organizations to engage directly with FEMA and our congressional delegation and others.
Look at you, Max. You took my concerns and you resolved it just like that. Thank you so much. Okay, so with that, other comments from folks about item D?
Well, this is Sally, and I just wanted to chime in on, the Biden administration is really looking at equity right now, and this is an equity issue. It's not just, oh, we can't do this because it's going to open this can of worms and all these other communities are going to hop in, but it is an equity issue in Alaska very clearly. And so how are they going to make things more equitable for Alaska Native peoples in obtaining FEMA funding.
I think that overall, and of all the the tasks that we've reviewed thus far, I would consider that this is a top priority. Like Joel, you've done a great job of weaving the federal funding throughout, and really there's lack of funding, lack of mechanism to build capacity, et cetera. And that this is a real top priority. There's $1 billion of funding to go to FEMA, the BRIC program and the infrastructure bill, but 77% of the tribes in Alaska can't apply to that funding right now. So that if there was more capacity to address this, it would really open the floodgates for communities and tribal organizations and technical assistance folks.
Well, let me, I see where you're both going. I like it. Someone in the comments or the chat section raised that DOI or BIA's seeking comments on their Tribal Resilience Fund. And one of the things they did raise is equity is one of the major issues they want to look at. So this plays right into what BIA is asking to. But I want to point something else out, and that is the Disaster Relief Fund funds FEMA, and it's a 75% or 90% federal allocation. But there's another huge opportunity that's out there, and Congress funds what's called a HUD CDBG Disaster Resilience Fund. And that's all political. It's not based upon any sort of measurement of need. It's based upon Congress saying, here's a bunch of money to these states or counties or cities that have gone through this major disaster trauma. Here's a bunch of money. They then allowed a portion of those funds to be used for mitigation. And I don't know, this may be too complicated right now, because right now the HUD CDBG disaster resilience and HUD CDBG mitigation funds, are driven by Congress. But in my research on this, the last tribe that ever received any of those funds was like a decade or 15 years ago. So the only swim lane that we can play in, tribes and small communities, really is the FEMA one. But I think it maybe we're being short-sighted to say it's FEMA. It's FEMA and other agencies as well that prevent small rural communities from engaging federal sources of funds.
Hey, Joel.
Mark, go on.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick question. Is the Corps still an unfunded player in, I guess it was village relocation, wasn't it, in the NDAA a couple of years ago? Do they still have a statutory but unfunded responsibility that we might be able to lean into?
I think we have somebody from the Corps on the call too. But go ahead.
Well, do we? If they are, let's put them on the spot.
Do we? Anyone? We had a lot of people jumping on and off. Okay, hearing none.
Well, I would just say, Mark, from my experience on that and the meeting with folks in DC on this, there is authority, there is a cost share match. It's very prohibitive. I think it's like at least 35%. And then on top of it, Congress has to give the funds to the Army Corps to do the work. So they're not really giving the funds to the Army Corps. And then there's this huge obstacle, like 35% cost share match. I think it is an example or a legacy of work that Senator Stevens, the late Senator Stevens, put forward that just isn't moving forward any further.
Okay, thanks, Joel.
Yeah. Well, Max gave us a really good revision to this item D. I'll ask others, do you have any other thoughts or comments?
Oh, Adelheid, do you want to speak? And Miranda also had raised hand, but also put something in the chat. But I think Adelaide's been trying to speak for a while now.
It's okay, Heather, I wrote it out there.
Okay.
Well, thank you. Then let's move on to item E. So DCCD, is this you, Sally?
Yep.
Can you speak to this then?
I can't remember being put in as a lead on this. I'm thinking maybe I had left and somebody put me in as the lead. What they're thinking about are the community profile maps. And, you know, the old fashioned community profile maps were really cool because that was something that a community could hang up on the wall and you could flip it around and you had all this great information on the community. And I'm wondering if that's where this is going. Because community profiles, yeah, that definitely would be under our jurisdiction as an agency because we collect all this information on the communities. And it would be pretty easy. One of the things that when I first came to DCRA, I got tasked with what version of a community plan could we do that could hang up in a tribal office. And of course, the old community profiles came to mind, and you could actually do a variation of a community plan, a spiral bound community plan that could hang up. So you could have all of the important parts of the plan there for the community to look at. And it was always available to them and not shoved away someplace. And I'm wondering if that's what this is about, because it sounds like you're not only summarizing the threat assessment, but relevant plans and linkages to other agency organization data. It almost sounds like something that we've talked about in the project that I'm working on with Jackie and Max for the infrastructure protection plans that we're going to be doing, and doing a poster sized version of it so that the community always has that available. But I don't know, is anybody else on the call that recalls putting this part in here? It already includes DGGS and Max as partners. So
Sally, you've called on Jackie and Max to speak to it, so one of you.
I propose we remove this. I mean, the risk assessments have maps. Sally, if you want to make some interactive story maps for communities, great, but that's my thought is risk assessments produce great maps that include local traditional knowledge. But
well, I think I wouldn't completely remove it because I do think you want to have some kind of a, not necessarily a map-based plan, but you want to have some document that summarizes the risk assessments and the community decision-making about what they want to do. I'm just not sure whether this type of product would be,
well, isn't that a hazard ultimately a hazard mitigation plan or some other type of managed retreat plan or something else?
Yeah, or even what we're talking about with infrastructure protection plans.
Well, Heather, let me ask you about the process. So this adaptation template will go to AVCP for their consideration, and they either adopt or reject or what?
I am not sure about that. I know that, usually we tidy this up a little bit and then we send it back out to the working groups, and the working groups can continue to work on these until the next time we have to submit the update, the official written update to the SEDS. And at that point, these are incorporated into that document.
Heather?
I ask if
Clarence might have something to add to that.
Yeah, Clarence?
The SIDS, like I said this morning, AVCP spearheads the SIDS process and everything, but the SIDS doesn't belong to AVCP. The SIDS belongs to to everyone. And what each working group is doing is looking at the strategies for each part of the SIDS and what they would like to see in improvements and what would bring more capacity and economic resiliency to the region. So this working group would really be the, I guess if you're looking for someone who's going to be an approver, this working group or the SIDS committee, when the SIDS committee meets, would be quote unquote approvers, not ABCP ourselves.
Thank you, Clarence. Well, with that said, and Max's recommendation to strike it, but others suggesting it may have value, I'm curious, would this be better to be incorporated under task A? Because we're in task A, we're talking about all the document preparation that describes the threats, the risks to the built environment and the community. And that's what this item E is. To me, this item E is a component of item A. I'll put that out for folks to consider. What are your thoughts?
Heather, can you scroll back up to item A? I'm just trying to.
I can do that, yeah.
Because this, I think that's kind of a follow-on to item A. I don't think it's part of item A. It wouldn't be a product of A. It would be the next step after A.
Well, then should we move item E to be item B?
Let's see. Can we scroll down? Yeah, oh, that's it. Can we go back up to what you're talking about, item B?
Well, item B becomes C and C becomes D,
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think that makes sense.
because then it follows.
Yes, I agree.
Okay.
So
But
anyone
what
have
that, what that
any,
product looks like, I don't know. We have to have a discussion about that.
does anyone have a problem if we move item E up to item B so they follow, track more closely?
We're going to rearrange these. I think the current B item, the general technical assistance, could be a first step, as you mentioned, Dole, that 60K to get things started. But that's nitpicky.
Yeah, item A kind of references the technical assistance, and I just put C task B, which is now C.
I would just, for the new B now, I would definitely change the description of what it's going to be and make it more flexible. So it could be a hazard mitigation plan or some other type of plan.
Okay, wait, which specific language am I making more flexible?
Well, I think we probably need to have a conversation about it, but develop map-based climate adaptation community profiles. I think I would change that language, and I'd like to, have a discussion about it probably outside of this group first.
Okay, I am going to put a note to revise this language, and then maybe for the next steps, is it Sally, Jackie, and Max, or look at this action and recommend revisions that?
Yeah,
can
and
be put
again,
on?
for the lead, it has to be the community. I think, we're just partners to the community in developing this, but this, whatever this is, it's their document. And so they need to be the ones that determine, what the outcome is.
Well, in the interest of time, Heather, I like your idea. I think the final revision of that, if you could get with Jackie, Max, and Sally, I think then that resolves this issue. That resolves A through E in my mind. The question then is there an item F? And when I was reading through this and when I was coming up with, this idea of, injecting federal funds in it, item F is implementation in my mind. How do you implement the design process or the planning process, the design process, and the construction process? And that's a challenge because you have so many different players who are involved in this different infrastructure. It's very complicated. You could have airports, you could have schools, you could have YKHC on clinics, you could have the communities on sanitation, you could have AVEC on electrical. I mean, it's just mind-boggling the number of entities who are engaged. So in some respects, I almost think that we have to put a implementation to be developed. 'Cause I don't know the
Can you
solution.
hear me okay?
Please.
Oh, thanks very much. So I think, while we're talking about item F and the implementation point, I have a 30,000-foot view question to ask, and it's related to that information I dropped in the chat a little while ago about the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the $216 million that's in the Senate's language that's in the House right now for the tribal climate resilience and community relocation. And I'm just curious if there's interest, in folks in the YK maybe coming together to talk about, who might be interested in applying for funds so that we can better capture those resources for the region to make sure that there's as much complementary infrastructure flowing in as possible from the funds that, hopefully should be coming forward once the federal government figures out this funding package's way forward. So maybe once the NOFOs are issued and folks have the notices of funding opportunities, interested organizations can communicate and come to the table and see what we can do to work together. Thanks.
That is a great idea, Miranda. This is Jocelyn with the Denali Commission. BIA is hosting listening sessions coming up. I posted a link in the chat, and so definitely encourage folks to attend these listening sessions to provide some of that input. Thanks.
Towards that end, I think one of the issues is the listening session and how this region can provide their input to BIA so that they can better use the funds. The amount of funds that BIA gets for the Tribal Resilience Program, 8 to 10 million a year, limits them to $150,000 cap. But if they're going to get 40 million plus a year, you start getting into implementation. And that's this item F. And I have nothing to offer on what that may look like. And one of the reasons why I don't know what it looks like is I think that's almost a regional conversation between the regional players and get their input on it, how they see it. Again, I'm gonna hate to do this to you, Clarence. You're one of the regional players there. What are your thoughts on this?
But I can't really speak, or I can't really, make a decision for AVCP, but I can surely bring it up the ladder to executive leadership and the board for consideration.
Well, I think it's something we should put there because it gets to what Miranda was talking about. There's an opportunity coming, and it sure be good for us to prepare for it.
Mm-hmm. I know that with the consultation sessions that have been happening that at least I've been a part of, I've been working with our legal and executive leadership in participating in those consultations. if we want to do that, we could, and I think we've worked with Miranda on a couple of them before too. So maybe Miranda, Joy, and I could talk about this. Joy,
Yeah, I'd love to speak up
J-O.
too.
Well, I think if you could get, YK and the Housing Authority and others there too, I don't know, maybe even the school districts, because, they've got major infrastructure that's threatened too. I don't know. I think we need to move on. We're supposed to leave 40 minutes for success. We've got 12 minutes. So I think we should move on, but I just wanted to put that out there that if indeed the switch is to look at federal funds and what we're going to do with them, then there comes the question of how you implement, and we'll just worry about that later. So Heather, let's move on to indications of success. I guess this is a question now, because it used to be item A was about risk assessments, but we made item A to be about all sorts of documents that are needed. And that's where the HMP process, I think it's both risk assessments and current HMPs. I don't think it should be limited to high-risk communities. I think it should be all the YK communities. I'll put that out there. Does everyone, what do you all think about that? The measurement is the risk assessments, or completing risk assessments for the high risk, and then hazard mitigation plans for everyone. That would be a third bullet.
Joel?
Yes, Mark, please.
Yeah, just to address that really quickly. So last night, the city had a Public Works Committee meeting, and one of our members is a local electrician, and he was talking about the need perhaps for building codes in Bethel, because he said, I got contracted to do work on the swimming pool, and I did it, and I put it up to spec, and over the time since the pool was finished, the permafrost has moved, the pilings have moved, the building has moved, and the work that he did, the electrical work that he did, is under a fair amount of stress because of that movement. So every community on the Delta is being impacted by climate change in one fashion or another, whether it's a heaving piling on the high school, or subsidence on a dike. Everybody's being impacted. So I think that any discussion like this should any metric should include every community.
Very good. Thank you. So we've added that HMP question, which gets to the threats. The 2-year target, I have no comment on that, whether that's important or not. Or, well, it seems to me the two should be risk assessments, and then also maybe it's a reasonable idea in 2 years that every community has a updated and improved FEMA hazard mitigation plan.
Does anyone have?
That'd be great. Yes, FEMA, DHSEM, we're looking to you all.
Yeah, is Murph still on the call?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Do we have any update? Sorry to call you out, but do we have any update on, like a regional approach to hazard mitigation plans? I know that's a long-term goal, but has there been any progress on that front?
No, we're still working on it and having discussions with FEMA to figure out what the right fit would be. It's a ways away.
Okay, and Joel, this is Jocelyn. I would echo you know, every community needs a hazard mitigation plan. And especially, I don't know if especially is the word, but yes, you know, certainly the high risk areas, but some communities have fallen through the cracks as far as high risk. And, you know, they're facing, you know, immediate needs in terms of protecting infrastructure. And, you know, that may not have been pointed out in the statewide threat assessment, for example. I was just approached by Stevens Village and they're having some massive erosion, and they're, you know, they were group 2 and 3 on erosion and flooding. So I support your comment on, we don't need to necessarily focus on high risk, or we may not even know or have that documented as what high risk is in some cases.
Thank you, I agree. I see we're down to 6 minutes and we've got some more indicators of success. I don't know about the jobs or internships created. I actually think that that's immaterial to what we're talking about. I think the bigger issue would be, can ABCP get their division up and running? To me, that would be more impactful. And again, sorry, Clarence, I'm going to put you on the spot.
Yeah, it could be, it should be an indicator because our division is responsible or listed down as a lead. So yeah, I think we could put down the CDD fully developed as one of the indicators.
So the reason why I say that, because I see jobs or internships created or retained. And so obviously I'm thinking jobs with respect to your division. So I'm going to the regional model, but this particular line item is talking, I presume, about the community level. So perhaps what we do is we have this line item be about community, create a whole new line following that. And that's the regional model that you talked about earlier, Clarence. Would you support that?
Yeah. Yeah, let's put it in there and just have it in there and
So this indicator is partly important because the SEDS is used to support applications to EDA, and the EDA, Economic Development Administration, does ask for this as part of their grant applications. So if there are any infrastructure projects that would be linked to any of these action items, this would be something that would be tracked as part of your implementation to be developed.
Yeah, Heather, I agree with you that we should keep it then. Can we then add a new line item about the ABCP Climate Division creation within the next 2 years?
Creating under this up here?
No, not under item C, under indicator success. See, there's that jobs or internship created. I think the next one should be creation or standing up the ABCP division on climate adaptation. Or is that the language that Clarence uses? It's the Community Development Division.
Okay, so what is it specifically?
Then, standing up the ABCP Community Development Division to provide technical assistance to communities on disaster resilience. Are you good with that, Clarence?
Yeah. Of course, there's a lot of work between now and 2 years because we need to ID a good sustainable revenue source.
Yes. But I think we should put it in there, that is a measure of success, because it wasn't in there last time, and we should have it this time.
So the measure of success would be that
You got the funding to do it. The sustainable funding, that's a phrase Clarence had used earlier, was sustainable funding. Well, with our limited time, we then move to the last one, the amount of private funding. To me, as I said before, when I was reviewing all this yesterday, this is the one that triggered me to say, well, the approach should be about federal funding because that's the lion's share of money. And so for me, this is the amount of federal, state, private funding invested in climate adaptation. I think it should be all three. I'll put that out there. Everyone, oh, there you go. I like that. You're a wordsmith, Heather.
And like Heather said earlier, I think EDA's evaluation on, private funding, it might be.
I like this. I like what you did there, Heather.
okay, and then all right, maybe that'll keep it all on the same page.
I'll turn it back to you. You've got 2 minutes left.
Okay, in closing, I would like to open up for any comments, questions that have not been able to be shared. And I also would like the group to think about when you might meet again. And this can be fairly general because we will be in touch with you, but clearly we have some follow-up to do. So if you have any sense of a general time frame that we can aim for, I will capture that and we'll aim for it.
Well, I'm available whenever you call, Heather.
Clarence, I think before you'd said some of the groups meet again in like maybe a couple of months or on a quarterly basis. This seems like a priority group, considering that there's potentially a lot of funding coming with the current administration. So
it's up to the working group, this group right here that's meeting right now. Like this morning, one of the work groups from this morning decided they wanted to do a quarterly meeting, and there was one person who was there who said, yes, I'll be the one responsible to ensure we're doing quarterly meetings. And then the other group, I think, was looking at either December or January as the next meeting, and then just all the other meetings after that to be announced. So it depends on what this group wants to do and how they'd like to approach.
okay, hearing nothing, quarterly. Okay, we've got to vote for, thank you, Chief Williams. Let's aim for quarterly, and we can put out a suggestion for maybe that same December, January timeframe. for the next meeting, and let folks respond when we send out these materials. Does that sound like a plan? Okay. So with that, I will say thank you very much. Do check your calendars to see what your availability is like. And we will send back out a slightly cleaned up version of these notes to keep in touch and start organizing for our next steps. Kayana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Heather, thanks, Joe.
Thank you.